Hey, Jeff Johnston here. Welcome to the Living Undeterred podcast. Have a very exciting guest I just recently met on social media, and I was really attracted to her projects and her passion and what she's doing for specifically, and I'm going to have her talk about this in more detail, but her documentary that she did that I was able to watch, which I really, really suggest all my listeners and followers not just follow Debra on social media, but get a chance to catch this video or this documentary. So Debra Gonsher Vinik, sorry, I want to skip the N in Gonsher.
Well, let me tell you, I've heard my name mispronounced so many ways, from ganja to gunchi to, so I doubt that there is a mispronunciation that's going to upset me or bother me at all at this point.
You've heard it and seen it all, but I'm honored to have you on the show. I'm really excited. This is a different type of show because of what you do, and you're in the documentary business. And you and your husband, right? Yep. And you do all sorts of documentaries, but why don't you talk a little bit about your most recent project and why it seems like is kind of the one that you should be most proud of? Is that be correct?
Well, let me say this. This is our 21st documentary, and to try to
so to say it's your most proud of wouldn't be fair.
Right. It's like anyone who has
maybe most impactful.
Anyone who has children, whether they're fur children or other kinds of children or plants, you love each one of them for its own very special reasons. And I mean that, each one. But there's no doubt that over 21 documentaries, the subject matter that we've chosen really, in the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years became ever more, I chose it because of its importance, but also of its importance to me. So, a number of years ago, I did a documentary called Beauty of Their Dreams, which was on girls' education. And I am so aware of what my education did for me. I mean, I was a child that was very badly physically abused. And I remember as a child just thinking, how do I ever get at, when you're a kid, you can never imagine that things are going to be better. You're living that life. And I just thought, how am I ever going to get out? And the only, I'm not saying I was that smart to figure it out like this, but I must have known that education was going to be my answer. And so, I went on and I went to college and graduate school, and I did a PhD, and, I'm very, very conscious of the importance of education and how education can help girls around the world. So we're not just talking about girls in the United States. We really shot around the world. And that was followed by a 2-part series on immigration and refugees and asylum seekers. And there was so much information that I wanted to share, it became 2 parts. And that kind of mirrors what happened with this most recent documentary. I started it, I'm going to say it's 3.5, 4 years ago already. Although it feels like I've been doing it for the last 10 years. And we started before the pandemic. And I was really responding to the constant deaths I saw around me. People I knew through other people I heard about. And I was really struck by the lack of conversation about women. So I do have a proclivity to look at situations, and at least 4 or 5 other of my 21 documentaries have focused on women. And about 4 years ago, I was listening to all the numbers and the deaths related to opioids, and I just didn't seem to hear anything about women. I thought, wow, are women not using any opioids? Because there wasn't any mention. And I started researching it. And I have to tell you, I have a a friend that I used to work with that I did not know he was doing massive amounts of pills. And he was at the university. He left because of all of these things. And he's been in recovery. And I really wanted to use him in this documentary, but I made the decision to focus on women because I don't think that there's never has been a focus on women in this way.
And once you open that door and you bring in some men, then all of a sudden it opens up more, taken away from, and I get it. There, you could make a documentary on every topic. So have one real zeroed in on women in the opioid epidemic. I watched the documentary, and obviously, my son, our son, died from overdose. My wife, though, was drug into the abyss from his death. So indirectly, the opioid epidemic, pulled her in. But I will say, when she passed away, she battled alcohol, but she also had lots of prescription pills by her side as well. And I don't feel bad sharing this story because A, she's not here, and B, I think it helps other people, especially women who are struggling with grief. It doesn't have to be loss of a child. It could be trauma, maybe sexual abuse when they were a child or whatever. And, over medicating, whether it's, or self-medicating, I guess is the term they use, whatever your poison is to, mask that pain, whatever you're trying to run from, can have dire consequences. And I often think to myself that had my wife, been able to become sober and, abstain from prescription pills, maybe she'd still be here today. Alcohol was what was on her death certificate, but grief and pain and suffering contributed, and you can't put that on a death certificate. So I guess as a documentary individual that you are, documentary producer, I applaud you for bringing this issue to the forefront through your documentary, and hopefully we can have more documentaries in this context. And obviously, one of the reasons why you and I are talking is I'm working on trying to work on a documentary myself on a bigger issue. So I really think it's great what you're doing. I'd like to know more about your other documentaries, and what did you learn from doing your documentary? Like, what's the main few takeaways that you had that when you got done, you said, wow, I really didn't think that this documentary would move me in this way, but this is the way it impacted me.
Well,
did you have a moment like that?
What happened, and it's interesting that I brought up the documentaries before this. What happened is that there was so much to talk about. I mean, there was so much, so that I'm glad that we're going to be dividing it into 2 1-hours that will be airing on ABC next year, because there's so much. Where do you start? The fact of the matter is that women, the percentages, people can play with numbers, but let's just say an overwhelming percent of women who succumb to this disease, and in terms of using opioids, have suffered some trauma, whether it's childhood trauma, whether it's emotional trauma, sexual trauma, physical trauma. Right. The list goes on and on. So, there's all of this that I wanted to talk about. There's issues that these drugs weren't even trial or clinically tested on women. So think about this, that it wasn't until 1993 were there any trials that women were involved with. So any drug you can think of that came out before 1993 was never tested on women.
I wonder
that's mind-boggling.
What would be the basis? Yeah, what would be the basis for that?
Somebody said that men just thought of women as being small men. That all it was, was just like a smaller version of men. And that clearly, from a physiological, perspective, from 1,000 different perspectives.
But I have to think, don't you think that's the minority of men? I mean,
well, I think that up to
or maybe the majority of people in those areas.
Well, I think that up to
but most men
that
I know,
point, it was clearly the majority, and they were the ones that were in control of. And and there was some residual elements of concern about pregnant women and drugs that would, was a throwback to whatever that drug that I can't think of that was disastrous but that's not just because you don't want to do a trial on women who perhaps are pregnant. That doesn't mean you cut out, which is what they did. That there were no testing on any women. So I thought that was really incredible and has long-term repercussions. So some of the medications that are taken in recovery actually weren't tested on women. You look at the dates that they came out and they were approved, they're way before 1993. I thought things that I still, even in 2 hours, I still couldn't address. Narcan and why Narcan isn't in every single building on every single college campus, every Walmart, every synagogue, every church, mosque.
It's criminal. It's criminal. It is because I just had Ryan Hampton on my podcast, actually just today, and it'll post later like yours will. And we navigated through that. Ryan's one of the top recovery advocates in the country. And he has, his life has been saved by Narcan. So he's a big advocate in all things treatment or, say, harm reduction based. But I guess watching your documentary again as a male in Iowa, I was very naive to the abandonment, possibly, I guess that's the word I can think of, from the medical profession and those people that are working with those in treatment and recovery for women. And I keep going back, and the only evidence I have is what I went through with my wife. I'm not a practicing clinician. I don't have clients. So the only lens I can view this from is as a husband dealing with this with my wife. And, I could say there's a chance that she slipped through the cracks, that even in her alcohol abuse early on, most of the people that when I visited the facility, most were male. I think it certainly is something that begs conversation. I mean, it deserves to have these conversations of why society looks at, it shouldn't matter if you're rich, poor, black, white, male or female, young or old. Addiction, substance use distress, trauma, suffering, pain. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are. And based on that, we should have the solutions not discriminate as well.
Well, I think one of the things that we try to do with the documentary is that you see stories from really across the board. So there are women who are in their late 60s who were prescribed fentanyl patches and have been on them for 15 years. You have Native American women who have their own sorrows and difficulties accessing medication-assisted treatment and recovery units. You have African American women, and the Kay, who is in this documentary, talks about what it was like for her to get treatment. And she used opioids for so long, for over 10 years, that she lost her hearing in both ears, which is really I spent a lot of time looking that up because, like her, I had never heard of that. And certainly it is very unusual, especially to lose hearing in both ears, but she did. There's all of these things, and a lot of it has to, be laid at the foot of genetics, as Marv Sepula says. People have, it's in your genes. People have a genetic propensity for it. And so if you put all these elements together, if you put abuse, and then you put a doctor who for your wisdom tooth extraction gave you some crazy amount of pills, like 30 or 40 pills, and you start taking, and then after a week and a half, your tooth doesn't hurt, but man, you feel a little not good
Yeah.
if you're not
Right.
taking those pills. So you continue on. And then a month later, it's too late.
Well, it seems like based on the statistics that treatment works better for women than it does men. Men have a higher relapse rate coming out of treatment after they go through, after detox and so forth. It seems that men relapse more frequently. And so if we can get more women with good quality, rehab and recovery services, the statistics say that, women will probably come out of it better, at least have less relapse. So that's favorable.
That's a big if. If we could get this,
because
thinking. I think one of the things that, I came away from was really thinking, where is the continuity of care? Okay, so somebody goes into rehab, they have 30 days, maybe they even do 90 days, and then they're out, and what is the plan, and who's support? How are they being supported? Or are they literally, okay, you're good to go?
I think it's the latter, and I think that's for both men and women.
Absolutely.
Again, I don't know. I've never been in rehab myself, but having a son and my wife in rehab, both of them, and my son got out of prison. He was just kind of like thrown to society. There wasn't a bridge there, and I think we owe it, if we're going to go that far. It's like quitting 100 feet from the finish line. It's like we're getting them right there. We do all this money and time and effort to get them in through detox. Now they're, going to treatment. We get them out, and then it's like, all right, you should be on your own. Well, it's lifelong. I mean, that's the thing I was talking to Ryan about, and a lot of people I talk with is this misnomer or misunderstanding that, recovery is like a destination. Like it's like there's an end date, and your last breath is probably the end date in recovery. When you're in recovery, it's lifelong, it's forever. And whether it's genetics or not, I spent some time in this in my book, because early in my journey, I got really, really into some heated debates about disease versus choice. About, if you're predetermined to be an alcoholic, that doesn't mean, I'll take it back. If you have the predisposition, it doesn't mean you're predetermined. Right. So you could have the gene to have to drink, or not necessarily that, but once you do drink, you can't quit. So it has to be activated biologically somehow through like your first drink. But I still think there's a lot of opportunities along that spectrum between never drinking and being in rehab that people can make better choices along the way. And so I vacillate between, well, no, I don't vacillate. I clearly say it's disease and choice. It's nature and nurture. And we spend too much time on the or, like, is it nature or nurture? I quit cold turkey. I don't know if I have alcoholism in my family, because one generation ago, they didn't talk about this stuff. So I could say, oh, my grandfather was an alcoholic. I don't know for sure. We just never talked about that stuff. Today, we do a lot more open about that. But I know people that come from alcoholic parents, and they've been able to quit cold turkey. So, and believe it or not, there's a lot more of those people out there than we get credit for. I think a lot of people assume that the majority of people that are in recovery struggle immensely every day, and there's a lot of us out there that don't.
Right, but I do think, because it would be remiss of me to talk about alcohol, because I've really focused on opioids, and I think there is a distinction between alcohol and opioids, and I think that what we know about opioids is there is a literal physiological rewiring of the brain.
Which good point.
I'm not aware of happens with alcoholism. Listen,
I don't think it does. I'm happy you brought that distinction up, because I got a little bit distracted there on what my point was without thinking about the difference between those two, type of addictions. Like myself, I was an alcoholic, but I never did drugs. So my abstinence isn't from, I'm not in recovery from drugs. I'm in recovery from alcohol. So, whereas a lot of people like my wife had both, and my son did too. My son had the alcohol and the drug problem. So, yeah. So, I guess in regards to how we can actually, so documentaries are great. I think they expose a lot of issues. How do we fix the problem? How do we get under the hood and get this thing to start helping the people that really need it in regards to treatment and getting people to get their lives back in order? Now that you've exposed this problem, what's the solution?
So I'm going to come back to that. But I want to just address something else that you said, which is really so on my mind recently also. This idea that we have of incarcerating someone who has perhaps some sort of substance use disorder, primarily I'm talking about opioid use disorder, and then having them come out of jail, incarceration, and as you said, and just going, there you go. There's a bus, get on the bus, is complete lunacy. And I almost think that if anyone from outer space would look at this, they would just be going, are these people, how it makes,
where's the humanity?
And where's the logic? Why would anyone think that just because you have gotten it out of your system, perhaps in a, and you detox, that means that you get on a bus and go back to your life. And that just really makes no sense. So,
well, and that was what I did, Debra. As a dad with no lived experience, when my son got out of prison, I thought that was his rehab. I didn't. Now, if I just could go back with what I know now, he may still not be here, but I would have been able to been a lot better support for him. And that I can't play regret and guilt. I can take the knowledge I have now from looking hindsight, and I can take that forward. And that's why I did the tour this summer. That's why I did my book. That's why I do my podcast. That's why I'm doing the expo. I do the radio show. It's like I learned a lot from my errors I made, or my being naive or overconfident. There's so many words I could explain where I just wish I knew what I know now. I mean, I was all for prison being his rehab. I said, Seth, you look great, son. I'm happy you went to prison. I'm not happy you got out early, but I'm happy you're out. We went to Dick's Sporting Goods, loaded up a couple duffel bags full of clothes, went to the store, loaded up on some food, and he sat in my driveway and thought he was coming home. I said, no, you can't move back in the house. That ship has sailed. You got two little brothers, 13 and 15. Your mom's all stressed out. I wouldn't let him back in the house. And he was dead within less than 2 months. And I would do the same thing over again. I had to protect the integrity of my family. And it was at his expense, at least at the time, I thought just his expense of living with us. I couldn't bring that toxic, I couldn't bring it back into the house. Even though I knew he was sober, I didn't trust that he'd stay sober. And so I don't know. I mean, I do wonder if that was something I probably should have had him move in. But then when he did, that's the problem with this addiction and this substance use and the mental health problem we have in this country. The collateral damage is just not talked about enough. The devastation and destruction it causes on families. You don't even have to die. It causes so many problems in families.
Right. But now, now obviously your hope or your agenda is that somebody listening to takes these words not only to heart, but to heart and soul, man. And it gets into a place where they have to put, their whatever aside and say, listen, I've got to be able to learn from this guy. This guy's has this experience. He knows, So there's got to be a way of balancing two things. How do you protect your 13 and 15-year-old? And how do you support with a continuity of care?
Yeah. Yep. That's that enabling and tough love balancing act. And, there's millions of people every single day, just in the United States, that are having those intimate conversations with loved ones right now, as you and I are taping this podcast, think of all the husband and wives and moms and dads and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters that are having these tough conversations right now at this moment. And some of these are going to end horrifically like mine did. And some won't. Some will be the next success stories that everyone anoints as this is the right way to do treatment. And then again, there's no template, Deborah, you know that. There's no boilerplate that says, okay, here's page 7. This is what you do when your wife gets out of rehab. This is what you do. It's just like, I still, as an advocate, I still think we just make up stuff as we go. And that's sad that our society doesn't have the resources and the facilities to have people be able to just go to for help.
Because
it's like we all kind of invent our own.
Think about the stigma. I mean, really, I mean, years and years and years ago, it was leprosy, right? Wasn't like, oh, well, but it's the modern day leprosy. Nobody.
Well, HIV too. Same thing with HIV.
Nobody wanted to say that, they had lost a child to HIV. Oh my goodness.
Or you couldn't be in the same room with someone with HIV because it was contagious. That's what people just believed these things. And you're right. It perpetuates the stigma and the discrimination that goes with it. But so in your documentaries, what other projects are close to your heart? What's kind of interests that you're going to be working on here?
So I said I was going to come back to the question you asked me, and I didn't.
Oh yeah, now, you have a better memory than I do.
I know that I was supposed to, but I'm not sure what the question was. So it's not.
I forgot to. Don't worry about it.
I think one of the things that's absolutely, we don't look at is, as you say, the collateral damage. So think of think of the mother who is has children and starts back in active addiction and then gets pregnant, and then there's this whole. She's like, what does she do? What does she do with her child? She's afraid if she doesn't go into recovery, they're going to take away her child. But if she does, they're going to know, and then they're going to take away her child. And then think of that child, because if the mother and child are separated, what kind of trauma is that for the child? So now we're perpetuating this hurt, this hurt of the soul, generation by generation by generation. And
it's a cycle.
It's a horrible cycle that, I know what the question was, but it's a horrible cycle that we can't break unless we put some of the monies. So this is what I want to see. Lots of monies. Everyone hears about the opioid settlement litigation monies, billions and billions of dollars. Well, what's going to happen with the money? And my raison d'etre, my agenda for this film is to say to people who see this film, you need to call your local official, your local elected official, because every state is going to get some of these settlements. Every state. Now, each state's going to decide, is it going to go to the state, or is it going to go to the state and counties? Is it going to go to the state, counties, and a foundation? But there's going to be gobs and gobs of money. And women need to get the resources to, as you said, if we know that they do better, then how can we not be putting money and making those resources available to them? Not only for the detox, but for medicated assisted treatment, for mental health services, for continuity of care. So when they get out, even it's not like, well, you've had a month of therapy, you're good to go. That's not gonna cut it.
I'm happy you brought up the mental health, because all this falls under mental health. I mean, I always paint the picture for people that are struggling with these terms being interchangeable. Mental health's the wheel, and the spoke is addiction, substance abuse, grief, trauma, anxiety, suicidal ideation, depression. Those are all spokes in the wheel. And we as a society go after the spokes. We want to fix the spokes, even though the wheel is flat. And so I think we need to focus on these individual spokes. Don't get me wrong, but we can't lose focus that all these are co-occurring. And it's very difficult to be a drug addict and not have some other issues in your life, like depression, anxiety. Maybe you were molested as a child. I mean, there's all these co-occurring things that I think, and I wrote about this a couple of months ago. I wrote a blog called The Mental Health Whack-A-Mole Dilemma, because we look at mental health as a game of whack-a-mole. It's like we chase one thing, put it out. But I think if a documentary could show this as a mental health epidemic, and that's what we were with. So we're in the cusp of a mental health epidemic, a crisis of epic proportions, I like to say. And then it just I keep going back to, okay, great, Jeff, you've identified the problem. Yep, we're all messed up. We all have issues. How do we fix it? And I'm wired to focus on solutions. That's, I maybe that's just the way I've always been my whole life, is that I think it's easy to find the problem, to identify the problem. Sometimes it's easier than some other problems, but I think the solutions is where we all really have a hard time. You mentioned things just like Narcan. There's people that are against Narcan. There's people that are the new one that's now 8 milligrams, Cloxada, I think. People are now coming out with ways they don't like that. And it's like, I think we need to start really looking at saving lives first and then worry about everything else after that.
But you have to go back to stigma, because if people who have opioid use disorder are so stigmatized that a lot of people don't really think their lives are worth saving. And that's true.
Well, I'll tell you what's, and I'm just going to say this, and I don't mean to anybody that follows me, that likes me. I hope this doesn't hurt their feelings or make them mad, but I can say that when people post things about their deceased child, and let's say it's cancer, car wreck, something that drowning or something, and then I post something about Seth overdosed, there is an immediate difference in perception. And I get it. I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to say people shouldn't say, well, yeah, the kid who died in a car wreck, that's more tragic than what your son did. Because I've even said that sometimes, that what happened to me was unfortunate, not tragic. But at the end of the day, it's still death. And, it's still extremely, disruptive to the family.
Well, wait a second. I have to stop you, because I disagree. Why is the person who died in the car wreck more tragic than Seth? And I'll give you another analogy. Which one is more tragic? Dying from an opioid use disorder and an overdose, or dying from cancer? Because they're both diseases. So are we going to start ranking? Oh, cancer is higher up on my weeping than opioid. Right. They're both diseases.
And we do rank. That's the problem. We do. There's no question we do. Or Narcan would be out there on every street corner. All the different medically assisted treatment programs would be acceptable. Right. I mean, we'd have fentanyl test strips everywhere. But we don't. Iowa's in a state where it's still legal, which is mind-boggling to me.
Right, because you can't have any kind of public facility without having a fire extinguisher, right? You know that there's a fire extinguisher. How is it possible, or why shouldn't it be, that there is a Narcan exactly where there's a fire extinguisher? A fire extinguisher is there to save lives, put out fire and save lives. That's what Narcan is. Will save a life. We know that. There's no doubt about that. There's no discussion about that.
Yeah, and the concerns people have is, what happens if I have asthma, or what happens if I have, and I'm like, there's not been any evidence or any clinical proof that Narcan has any downside, other than if too much is given, the recovery from that takes longer, and is the detox from it in a way if you got too much of it. I hate that word associated with Narcan, but coming down from the Narcan could be more severe. So
yeah, but let's
be,
balance this. Coming
right.
down,
Life
right?
or death, or
exactly.
coming down. Yeah, right. No, I get it. You're preaching to the choir. I know I wanted to touch base with you a little bit about some future projects. Are you going to stay on the theme of opioids and addiction in women, or are you going to try a different angle on some other topic?
Well, okay, so I feel like it was impossible to cover all the things that I want to. So I talk about Narcan, but I don't talk about it for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, I don't talk about what I think is an outrageousness, which is that in half of the states in the country, medications that women are on when they are incarcerated are not given to them. I don't know how that actually is, I'm going to use a word, I'm not a lawyer, but legal, or certainly it's not humane. If you have diabetes and you go into a prison situation, diabetes medication is part of what you would get across this country. How is it that half the states are going to deny you your medicated assisted treatment? How is that? That's.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So
wow.
that's. So I do want to do that. There's a documentary that I wanted to do for a long time since one of our first documentary, which is about water, because we did a documentary in Africa. It was about the conversion of a Ugandan group called the Abiyudaya to Judaism. And we were in Uganda, and all anyone thought about a lot of the day was water. So when we would leave the tribe we were with, they would pack us up with, large plastic gas containers that didn't have a top. We stuck a banana. We would go get water for them, bring it back before we went to the hotel. So water has been on my mind. And then I may actually do a documentary which would be very different, but is on something that I've been talking about and I have a website about for a lot of years, which is about gratitude. I
remember you saying that.
We started a website years and years ago. And before we started it, I had this practice where I would stop at 2:30 every day. My running watch would go off, and that would remind me to stop and look around and just think about how much I had to be thankful for.
We talked about that. Yeah, I remember.
And it went on to now it's on my phone, and we started a website, and every person I interview, I always ask them about gratitude. And, I'm always really clear about this. I was talking about this with, I'm speaking at Hazelden, Betty Ford. I was talking to them about this because I'm really clear. I'm not in a good mood. Let's make it clear. I'm not in a good mood every day. I have a good many days I'm in a foul mood, not just a bad mood, a foul mood. And I can't understand how everyone is blah, blah, blah. But at 2:30, for me, it's a time to reset. And I just go, I can't stand that person, and a list. But at 2:30, I take a breath and I go, oh my God, I love chocolate malted milk balls more than I can tell you. And I have a husband I adore, and he gets on my nerves, please. And cats.
Of course.
But I am, I'm always thinking about it. And then I go back to the rest of the day, and I'm still annoyed. Please, I keep on saying to people, it's not like it's this magic pill. I go, oh, I'm grateful, and then I'm in a good mood for the rest of the day. No, but it kind of reminds me, things can be really blank. I know this is probably not an R-rated, so not nice, but But there is so much, if you look, if you take a moment, to be grateful for.
It's always there, and it's a recalibration.
Yes,
That's
that's
what it is.
exactly perfect.
And yeah, it is. And it's like, I think one of the issues that, and I wouldn't say especially kids, but I think this goes for all humans, is a set of a couple things. One is expectations, is that their expectations are out of whack. So in other words, kids live in this game society where they can buy into their life and they can live in this fantasy with zero consequences other than the game being over and they lose. Whereas then they get into the real world and they have to actually look people in the eye and they got to make tough decisions, and they got, the consequences come from the choices that they make. And a lot of kids have a hard time with that. So expectations should be realistic. They should be attainable. So you should be able to have goals and stuff that you can achieve, and they should be something fair. I think a lot of kids do too much comparison, and adults are too. If I see a podcast I like, I think to myself, why can't that be me? Why can't I do a better podcast? Or somebody doing something on LinkedIn that's very creative with advocacy, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? And so I think expectations is like the one big thing out there that we need to do a better job getting people to understand, that you need to have realistic and death's probably the easiest one to explain, Deborah. When I do my workshops, it's death. And the way I explain it is, we all know it's coming. Nobody that ever got away from it, ahead of you. It doesn't always happen at a convenient time, and it rarely happens in the right order. Yet we all know it's coming. But with this incredible knowledge and wisdom that we have, when it happens to us, we act like it wasn't supposed to happen, like it's supposed to be somebody else. And so death is the clearest understanding of expectations. I'm not saying wake up and expect to die. We want to expect to live. But when it happens, it happens. And sometimes there's not a damn thing you can do about it. The second is preparation. What are you doing every day to prepare yourself for, I like to say, the marathon of life? And so expectation and preparation are two really big pillars of what we're trying to talk to people about. And again, I'm not sure where I got off on that, but I think for people to work with their mental health, the more they can be aware of self-assessing what they're going through, be more in control of their own decisions. Like Ryan said today, choose recovery choices, having choices in recovery instead of the government making the choice or the prison making the choice. We all need to have options. The more, the better, but it gets too politicized. It gets too agenda driven. And now it's going to be $54 billion thrown out there in the settlement. You don't think people are going to be reaching for that with their hands out that don't deserve to get a penny of it?
That's why I want people to see this film and then go make a call. I'm going to add a third one to your list. You had a number of things about.
Well, I do have a third one, but I'm going to hold it back and see if you got it right.
I don't know if I get it right. I'm just going to add one more. I think an important thing is a time frame. So when we talk about expectations, I think something that's devastating is these open-ended time frames. So I'm going to give you an example. So when at some point many, many years ago, I was working on my PhD, and I wanted it done. I wanted to graduate at a certain time, but it took time to do. At the same time, I decided to run a marathon. I decided it in January, and my first marathon I ran that October. And I was so joyous because I had set up this thing. It wasn't lingering for years. I had set up a goal.
That's awesome.
And I achieved it in October. Whereas, my PhD, I did actually fairly quickly, but it wasn't in 9 months. I can tell you that much. The joy I had from that first marathon was just unbelievable. I mean, it was really
I bet.
unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. I just kept on saying to people, I just couldn't believe it. And this was before marathons were so in. I just couldn't believe I had done it.
I've never ran one, so you're ahead of me.
I ran a number of them, and none of them gave me the same thrill as that first one, which was just inconceivable that I had done it. But the time frame,
and you prepared for it too.
I did, but I had an end goal. It wasn't like I was going to be doing this for years and years to come. I don't know. God bless the people who, athletes who train for years and years to be in the Olympics. I don't know if I could have, just endlessly had an expectation, back to the idea of expectations. And, I had an expectation, and then I did it, and then I could move on.
Yeah.
And I think that is important. Otherwise we just go, maybe, it kind of starts weighing you down. Can I still do it? Or maybe I should give up. Do I give up? You're just caught in this quandary of like, when does an expectation start being like handcuffs?
Yeah, I completely can relate to that, because my advocacy for mental health is at times, overwhelming. I have friends that worry about me, as that this is what I do when I get up in the morning. I do this all day. I think about it when I sleep. And I'd like to say it's hard. It's easy for me to disconnect, but it's hard for me to disconnect because I get such a reward out of it, like you did running in that marathon. And I feel like that every day. But burnout's very likely, very likely. The third thing that I always talk to people about, and I'll get your thoughts on this, is what I call evolution. And that's the evolution of self. And that's your progression as a human, and looking back in your life, not in the context of pain and suffering, but in the context of learning and saying, this happened to me. It happened for me, not to me, and it takes a lot of practice. It took me I'm 56 now. So it took me like 52 years to get where I could start looking at any event in my life as opportunistic and not a curse or a punishment or bad luck. And I think for people in addiction and substance use, distress, and mental health, depression, things like that, it's easy not to look at life that way. It's easy to look at life as why me instead of why not me.
Well, it's interesting. The why not me is a feeling I always had. When I was younger, I always thought, why wouldn't my plane crash? Everyone thinks their plane won't crash. I remember I was dating a guy at Columbia University, and I was doing, kind of risque things, meaning walking along alone as a woman at night. Why not me? How long can everybody go on saying, why me? Somebody's got to be that number. Somebody's got to be on that plane that goes down.
Wow. That's a odd way to look at things, I have to ask, what's the name of the cat making that noise?
Oh, that one's Minnie and her brother, Minnie and her brother Cooper. I have Minnie and Cooper and Barnes and Noble and Smidget. And Minnie announces that she has the ball. She wants me to know that. So I'm naively thinking I'm going to be able to train her. So I even have some yummies. So if she brings me the ball, she'll get some yummies. That's the idea.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question that just popped in my head, and that's what happens with attention. That's the beauty of attention deficit. Do cats and dogs, let's just stick there, or maybe we could say animals, but do they have a soul?
Yes. Absolutely. No hesitation.
How about like a deer or a rabbit?
Yes.
Or, is there a line where you draw and say, well, that now all of a sudden a fish doesn't? You know, I mean, I guess where do you draw the line on that? Because I agree with you. I think dogs and cats for sure do.
I think
But
anyone who's had a dog or a cat knows that, first of all, their personalities, they have personalities. You know,
oh yeah, just like humans, distinctly different.
Absolutely. There's no
Every dog I've had has been different.
You might be seeing one walking,
I see,
and that's Noble. And yeah,
I love it.
They are very distinctive. So why would we think that something that's so distinctive, like, you know, this one will go out, this one doesn't, this one will eat this one will eat that, this one, you know, walks all around my body, this, you know, I think they do have, you know, souls. I think that you ask a good question, because do fish and do cows, and if you think that cows do have a soul, then you have the problem of if.
I know. And this is where I love this question, why I waited till the very end, because I'm you know, I'm agnostic. I make no beef about that. I've never believed in, I literally don't believe in the afterlife either, but that doesn't make me non-spiritual. I'm just as spiritual as any religious person on the planet. But I just define things like faith and all that differently. But when it comes to pets, it's like, I don't know what you call it. I don't know how similar they are to us in the afterlife, but I'll tell you what, when I am in a fetal position crying, my dog Camus comes from anywhere, and he is whiny, and he puts his head on my neck, and he licks my face. I have to push him away and say, I want to cry. Leave me alone. It's like, I'm in the middle of a damn good cry. Get out of here. I got to be mean to my dog because he's here to help me. And
he's saying to you, but
I've gotten arguments with people.
He's saying to you, don't cry.
My dog has a soul. You could believe in God or what, I don't care, but my dog has a soul. And my other dog, who could care less if I'm crying, he's got a soul too. He just doesn't show it the same way. So I had to ask that question because I saw your cat, and my attention deficit said, I want to ask Debra about that. But yeah, I think people who are grieving, man, pets can be so damn helpful.
Well, pets are, you know, pets have better instincts and have senses that we don't have,
and they don't judge.
Our senses have got, maybe we had them, but they got dulled over time. But those pets pick it up. They know it. I mean, you're weeping, and your dog won't listen to you even when you're pushing away, because he knows better than you do. He knows
he can help me.
You know.
And that's what that's the hardest part about putting a pet down. I just freaking hate that. And I put my cat down the day before my mom died. And Opie was 16, I think, or 15. And Opie was, Seth carried her around. My wife, helped pick him out. And it's so traumatic to put an animal down. And so I think sometimes if you don't have children and you put a cat down or a dog that you're really close to, that feeling can be just as impactful, just as painful as someone who loses a child. And for people listening are going to say, well, Jeff, no way. But yeah,
absolutely.
I really do. Especially if you don't have children and these are your children. I think people that lose pets, I mean, you got to watch out for them. People can go through the same stages of grief, with a pet. And that's why pets.
Doesn't it come down to, and I know I don't want to take Marv Seppala's thunder on this, but it's about love and the love, you love that pet, and that pet, is close to you in ways that other people just can't imagine. And so when losing that pet is, I can tell you, we have 5 cats now. We had 6, and we lost one. We had to put Bunky to sleep the beginning of 21, and Bunky was my husband's doggy.
Bunky, I like that name. It was
for the word rambunctious. That's how we came.
Yeah, I like it.
And this cat followed David every place. When David had his heart surgery, Bunky was laying on his stomach where he shouldn't, but Bunky was there and David lost his mother about 3 months prior to Bunkie. And David said to me, you know what? You know, he loved his mother so much, but she was 93, God bless, and she had an amazing life, and she talked about it all the time. Bunkie was, you know, an open wound in David's heart. There's just no doubt about it.
I know.
You know,
it's you know, when you buy one, you know, I know when I buy one, there's going to be a day, but you know, I got Opus's ashes are up there on my mantle next to my wife, next to my son, next to my mom. And, you know, they become part of your family. And I don't know. I just, I think that's a lightened way to end this because we got pretty deep into a lot of different things today. And it's been close to an hour, which is, you know, doesn't feel like an hour, but nor did our last conversation.
What we said.
But yeah. Do you have anything that you would add to just wrap this up in regards to people out there that, you know, men or woman or child or adult that are struggling with, you know, mental health or substance use or opioid addiction? Any words of wisdom or something you could say to them as they go into the holidays? Because the holidays are a very tough time for people that have lost people too.
Well, one of the things that one of my takeaways from the documentary is I would ask people who had used pills or heroin. And I didn't include this for obvious reasons. I asked them, how did it make them feel? And there was some kind of positive things, but most of the answers were about how they just didn't want to feel, and it numbed them and it took away their pain. Yeah. So it wasn't this kind of, oh, it makes me want to dance. It was, I didn't think, or I didn't feel or remember that I had been raped when I was 5 years old. And then again, and then again, it took it away. And so
they were escaping rather than exploring. They were escaping.
And so I think when we go to the holidays and we have this imagining that everyone's great family is gathered around, and nobody's family is like that. I mean, really, nobody's. So, you know, I would say to people, first of all, I would say take even the second, even if you only have 2 minutes of thinking to yourself, I really don't want to do this anymore. Take those 2 minutes in between the next minute when you want to use again, and take those 2 minutes and make a call and get some help. Just even those 2 minutes, and just remember that being numb is useful. There's no doubt, but being alive is pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many neat ways to comment on what you just said. I mean, I heard someone once say you're either busy living or busy dying. And that is true, that every choice you make, you know, if you're in recovery and you decide to go get drunk, you know, that's not the busy living road, you know, and it probably won't kill you that day. And again, statistics say you do fall off the wagon a lot when you're going through recovery. But yeah, it's just trying to give people hope and inspiration, and that's what your documentaries are about.
And don't stay alone, because alone is a place where, you know, I don't want to be overly dramatic and say no good comes of it, but it's not. Find some place to go to help other people, not to help people. You don't want to help. I understand. Just find a friend and be with them, because
my most terrifying moment in my entire life was last Christmas when I was alone, not Christmas Day, but during the break. And that's the only time I considered suicide, last December. So I'm coming up on 1 year after all I've been through.
You have an open, standing, and on a podcast invitation. At any point, come on over to my house. It's open invitation.
Fortunately, every time I share that story, that invitation list grows. So I have plenty of people that I can reach out to. But that's why I share the stories, that I don't want to ever go back to that day. And I'm not trying to avoid less than I'm trying to prepare. I'm trying to prepare for moments where I have a weakness like that. And like you said, it becomes a strength, and for people out there over the holidays, being alone is tough. And like you said, let's make that extra call. Even if you're with your family and you feel good, think of that older person that just got widowed or widower, or your aunt in the nursing home that cousins are all out of town. Just stop by or give them a call. And it may not mean the world to you. I hope it does, but it certainly means the world to whoever you're doing it to.
And that's what we talked about last time, which is, excuse me, how all of our lives would be changed if we just took a moment to give someone a compliment that day.
If each one of us did that once a day, think of the 8 billion times that could be replicated. It's astronomical, the velocity that goodwill could, and when you're on social media, so am I, and I comment and say nice things more than I get back at me.
I feel the same way.
And I like that. And when I make a comment, like you make a post and I put a comment, I don't expect you to comment and say, "Oh, Jeff, thanks a lot. Oh, by the way, your post was great too." It's like, I know how that works. That's an echo chamber. It's like, I like to give out lots of compliments, and it just makes me feel good. And when someone says something about my post, I like it, but I'm not fishing. I'm not out there trying to get people to do that. And I think there's something about altruism. There's something about doing something where you feel really good about it and you're not expecting anything back in return. It's like the perfect scenario in goodwill.
Right. But I want to say to people out there listening, you don't have to be altruistic. You don't have to even do anything good. Just don't be alone. Find a friend that you really believe when they say, "Come on over," because we all have friends that say that, but when we do get down, we go, "Yeah, I don't want to go there." They don't really mean it. But hopefully there's one person, that's all you need, one person to go, "I know I can count on Joanne no matter what. I can get in the car and go to her house and be whatever kind of crazy."
Well, I really enjoyed this. Appreciate, all the different areas we covered. And I'm really hopeful, and I'll do what I can to promote, your documentary. So when does the documentary actually come out?
So, what we're doing now is we're doing screenings around the country, but it will start airing in May. The part 1 will be airing on start on Sunday, May 20th. And then it will be available on ABC stations throughout the country. And then it will be, part 2 will be in September. And then there'll be a 60-minute version on PBS, which will be...
and it's called "Attention Must Be Paid: Women Lost in the Opioid
Well, I
Epidemic."
don't know. That title is for the feature film. It may change for the 2-part series.
Maybe I wasn't supposed to say that.
That's okay. But right now...
Anyway, that's a good title if that's what it ends up being.
Women and the opioid crisis. And unfortunately, quite frankly, there is nothing else out there. No one is talking about it. There's a word for it in Yiddish. It's a shanda, which means, it's a crime that women are invisible. And it can't be.
Let me do what I can to help promote this. When you need help, reach out to me.
I certainly will.
And I'll talk to you too on some other things. So, well, appreciate it very much, Debra.
It's always great talking to you. You and I know that we could talk about these issues literally through the night, but it's really been a pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, thanks for being on the show, and keep living undeterred. Okay.
Absolutely.